Welcome, everyone. We are delighted to be here at the Qualcomm Institute this week, and we are really grateful to them for their partnership in putting this event together and putting it on. And so I'm very happy to be here on stage with Ramesh Rao, who is the head of QI, as well as our normal participants in this session, the patterns that matter for 2025, Mark and Evan. This is basically, Ramesh, a preview of what happens when we have dinner together as a family. So we're inviting you into that process today.
Thank you for letting me know. With 60 seconds to go.
So we're here to talk about the patterns that we're watching in technology and the global economy. This is kind of a 50,000 foot view of what we're thinking about and what we're keeping an eye on. Ramesh, I think we might start with you, because we have very strong opinions and we're not afraid to share them. And I want to make sure that we have the Qualcomm perspective out there first. What are you thinking about? What are you looking at? And when you think about the future of tech, what are you investing in?
There's a lot there to unpack. I want to hit on two main things that I'm personally focused on. We are fortunate that we are in an environment where we are influenced by many developments that take place on campus. So there's an opportunity to synthesize things. On the quantum front, which we are trying to nurture, quantum sensing, being able to sense magnetic fields in particular, seems to be a foundational technology that will help with navigation in challenged environments, but also for us here to also sense signaling inside the human body. So wearable devices that can allow you to understand what's happening inside your body. There are companies that we are nurturing here that are using it as diagnostics long before anything shows up in the blood. You can tell if you've been exposed to a pathogen. We have also deep interests in being able to read the mind passively to figure out what parts of the brain are getting activated. All kinds of new wearable devices that seem to benefit enormously if you can miniaturize sensors and have them operate in noisy environments. That's one. And like everybody else in the room, I'm sure, I can't shake LLMs out of my mind. I go to bed almost literally these days in a conversation with an LLM in my mind. And the main thing that I'm identifying is something which is somewhat dystopian. I feel there is this thing, and I'm trained as an engineer, so it's all fascinating for me to even talk about things like epistemology. But what I feel is there is epistemological fallacies that are embedded in how LLMs work. So you may feel like you have understood something, but you haven't. How do you know when this LLM that you're playing with actually isn't making sense, even though it seems the most persuasive thing you've come upon? So how do you systematically test LLMs for their propensity for fallacious reasoning, right? So this is something that I think we as engineers, as technologists, actually have something to contribute. And if I have an opportunity, I would love to talk more about it.
A man of my dreams.
Yeah, you're going to get Mark's story.
Yeah, thank you. You just made my life much, much easier.
All right, so we can skip Mark talking about LLMs. Mark, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about this morning?
Funny you would ask, Barrett. LLMs. Oh, we got there. So the pattern, it's the same pattern you mentioned, but maybe it'll go a little deeper. I feel as though, so I run an AI company, Pattern Computer. We'll talk about it tomorrow. But I have therefore a lot of invested in understanding these techs and what they do with regard to what you just said. And so we'll talk about most of that tomorrow, but probably the largest pattern series I'm trying to follow is that pattern series, because it's affecting everything. And the part of the pattern series that I worry about most is the blind adoption by everyone and the blind spending of hundreds of billions of dollars, if not more, worldwide to embed a tech that we know for a fact is, you call it fallacious. Yes, it hallucinates. I don't like these made-up Silicon Valley terms. I call it life-threatening. And so these horrible integrated, unavoidable parts of that technology. It's not a bolt-on. It's not something you can hive off or put guardrails around, really. It's going to come at you no matter what. So the mass adoption in every country by this tech, knowing about this implicit failure mode, leaves us open as a society to terrific risk. And we're trading off money for risk somehow in a way that I don't think anyone's calculating anywhere, except Sam Altman maybe. So that pattern of social blindness or willing blindness in return for money, I guess, something, maybe to be part of the group. But whatever it is unfinished. And the arc is not going to bend toward justice. It's going to bend toward, I'm afraid, it's going to bend toward finding that our entire social system is then dependent upon something that doesn't work properly all the time. And the result of that will be a lack of trust between each other and between us and our machines. And all that stuff that we read about in science fiction will be in this room. It'll be part of our AI system and a part of our AV system. It'll be part of our food system, it'll be part of our bus system, our transport system. And so that particular pattern is fascinating. It does good things, which often is pointed out. It's useful, but when it's brought to use, which is involving life or death, then it's not good. So I'm watching that social aspect of that technical story to see where we go next and how do we protect everybody from what I'm afraid might happen.
I want to talk about a related pattern that I've been noticing, which is an observational pattern, the pattern is that lately every tech developer I know who works for one of the big 5 companies is really pretty disheartened. They are not having a good time inside of companies. They know that the technology doesn't work. I overheard a Google developer at a coffee shop talk about how everyone inside of Google, at least on his team, is so upset that they're putting LLMs in all of their products because it's ruining all of their products. And so I think, the general public has bought into this very much. A lot of entrepreneurs have bought into it because it makes their lives easier, right? There are definite benefits. And so what's interesting is to see when the social reaction to technology is always much slower than the technology itself, right? And I think one of the things that I'm interested to see how it plays out over the next year or two, especially, is at what point of hallucination, like what is the balance between ease of use, the benefits of LLMs, and the errors that it creates, and where does that kind of settle out? I think that's a very interesting question. I don't think it's going to happen in the big 5 tech companies, except for maybe Apple.
May I add one little PS that we're watching in real time? Yes. We're watching a new pattern. We've only been talking about it for a week. It was in the news yesterday. And that is, if you look at big tech, big brand companies, I'll name a few, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, their approach to this issue are quite different from each other. And so in all cases, they're trying to be careful, but take them in order. Microsoft put in $13 billion. I don't think you'll ever see Satya and Sam Altman on the same stage again. And they don't call it AI anymore. They call it Copilot, right? Your Copilot's helping you. So they're getting as far away as they can from OpenAI branding, OpenAI personnel, OpenAI when it blows up and goes to jail, whatever's going to happen there. You're going to think of it not even as Mr. Clippy. It's just going to be a part of your Excel spreadsheet. That's all. And you look at Amazon. Now we're getting into an interesting piece of territory where Amazon has Alexa and Apple has Siri and the iPhone. These brands cannot afford to screw up. When you say, Alexa, play classical music, and it turns out to be hot jazz from Harlem, you're not happy. And you know that it could do better. It's really a monkey wrench you want. You don't want to have a maybe have it work. And so their brand can be destroyed in minutes. And we've seen this almost happen by shipping the wrong product. Sonos went through this and they almost went dead. So, if you've got something, you know how it works every time. You turn your car left, the car goes left. If that's what Apple is, if Apple is the computer for the rest of us, Steve Jobs, then if suddenly the rest of us can't use it reliably anymore, we're not going to buy Apple anymore. It'll take a week. And so they know that, and they refused. I mean, they were alliance members with OpenAI. No way, not a chance. And so they've written papers now, scientific peer-reviewed papers, saying this stuff is bullshit, and we can't install it. We're not doing it because we're shy or stupid. We're doing it because we're smart, and we can't afford. The brand cannot afford to have this stuff running on our products. And with Amazon, it's the same thing. If you say Alexa, and Alexa brings back Poca.
It doesn't work very well if she accidentally orders 10,000 pounds of toilet paper
Exactly.
instead of 10.
Yes. So these brands are going to be really interesting in this pattern because they have to stand up. And instead of, the media is mocking them for being slow to adopt, flip that completely and you'll have the right story. 180 degrees wrong. So instead of mocking them, they are the smartest guys in the room, and they're telling you something that the rest of the media doesn't want to hear right now.
All right, let's go to Evan. Evan, I know you've got
I think we've covered LLMs.
Yeah.
I think for those who've read some of my work, this probably won't come as a surprise, but what I think of as a major new pattern is perhaps one that's composed of old patterns, and that's this general, and I think we can all feel it too, there's this general rising risk environment. And whether it's, we work on pandemic risks, but add climate change and add geopolitical risk. And I think that is known, but the combo of those things and the confluence of those things is what we're dealing with now. And so when you feel that low-level stress, it might be that climate change and
I don't know what
pandemic
you're talking
risk
about, Evan. I never feel stressed.
and a rise of
When you wake up worried in the
authoritarianism
morning.
around the world are all adding together and compounding, and climate change. So I think that what we're going to see, and we were talking about debt earlier this morning over breakfast, national debt, right? Rising national debt, credit card debt. Larry was going on about the compounding effects of all the different kinds of debt that have gotten out of control, and those will all compound with things like climate change. And we've talked about that at Fire before, right? When you start looking at the number of insurance companies that are going to have to deal with how many billions of dollars in damage, and how
just
fast,
stop insuring.
or just stop insuring, which is now a problem. Those things will all be compounding. And so I think, just like Warren Buffett would tell you the power of compounding interest, we're all feeling the pain of compounding risk. So I think in that context, I can be dark, so I don't want to depress everyone in the room.
On the other hand,
In that context, I think it helps to know that that's what's happening and to say to yourself, okay, this is what I'm facing, so it's not surprising that I am stressed by this environment. However, any large risk also presents a large opportunity. So, whether it's climate solutions, this whole week is going to be, by design, filled with ways to respond to that opportunity. And every single risk in life comes with an opportunity that effectively is always tied to it, which is solve the problem. And that's what we're focused on here. So I think, I do not want to risk, taking a room full of brilliant people, speaking of risk, and making them feel like it's hopeless. It's not, and you're all part of the solution to each of these problems. But being clear-headed about it, it is rising. It's getting worse right now because of the compounding risk issue. And I think we can all do a lot to fix it, and probably make good money fixing it in each little category, and then that will compound.
well done.
All right, let's talk about climate specifically, because this is something that we cover quite a lot at Fire. It's very important. It turns out we all need food to eat, water to drink, and air to breathe. And there are a lot of other people out there that also would like the same things. We're living through a time where we're seeing increasing climate disasters and climate emergencies. And at the same time, we're seeing a reduction in government spending on solving those problems. I'm curious to hear from the two of you, or the three of you, actually. Ramesh, I'm sure you have thoughts on this as well. Where are the bright spots?
I would actually defer to Ramesh because you guys are working on some cool stuff here that has to do with that.
Yeah, so we've been identifying and siloing problems like climate or food, but I think looking to the future, I feel there's opportunities to think in terms of platforms that address multiple problems at the same time. One that we are pursuing is hyperspectral imaging, so you can build low-cost sensors that can scan things across a very wide range of frequencies. And you can tell if a plant is under distress. You can tell if a plant is being attacked by a particular pest because of how the plant reacts to it. You can tell what happened after the fire blew through a certain region. You can tell if somebody is making fentanyl in their backyard, right? So there's all kinds of signals that you can pick up if you have this one platform, okay? And they generate enormous amounts of data, so you need an infrastructure such as the telecommunications infrastructure, such as the high-speed networking infrastructure that we have. So you can move this data and do the deeper analysis so you can pull out these signals from the things that you're able to measure. They could be mounted on towers, they could be flown on drones, they could be satellites, right? So there is this new way of coming up with a way of having greater awareness of your environment that isn't about just solving one rare event, but it's useful to commercial growers, it's useful to people who care for the environment, and addresses health issues. So we are betting on that as an example of something that will help us, to be honest, to come up with a robust way to deal with even political beliefs on, what's a problem and what's not a problem.
I'd like to say something nice about Ramesh, if that's
Go
okay
ahead,
with the
yeah.
moderator. First, I want to thank you. Here we are. I love this place. I love what you and Larry have done together and what you are now leading in. It's terrific. And whatever you want to call it, Cal IT, I'm still confused after 15 years. But Qualcomm Institute, thanks for being our host. Thanks for helping us find this home. I hope we keep being our home and your home and our home and so on for many years to come. And I really appreciate your assistance and your leadership in helping us come here. That's for you all. And then I want to go back to the very first thing you said up here. From a physics perspective. So those of you who don't know me don't realize that I have a really deeply ingrained bad habit called fascination with physics. And it'll never go away. And that thing you said, for those of you who are not physics related, you put two things together, quantum sensing and magnetism. Now I'm going to make a really bald statement. You may not agree with this. So I'm going to give you some air cover right away. There are a lot of things that physicists don't understand, even though you would assume they did, like what is an electron? And one of those things, deep, is magnetism. It makes a lot of sense when you're a kid and you have a toy magnet and you put it in the refrigerator, but if you're a physicist, it really makes no sense whatsoever. But there are a lot of terms you can use, like magnetic field, so you sound like you know what you're talking about. But if you really start to peel that onion, there's just really wildly nothing there. What is space made of? How do fields really exist? What are they doing when they exert force? Unknown. So this idea of magnetism and its relationship to velocity, which you didn't mention, but as a sensor, that's what it does, is really interesting. It's one of the great questions in physics. And so I agree with you that it's a really fascinating bleeding edge thing. And your mention of those two things together, they're really fascinating quantum level understanding of physics and what is magnetism together. Brilliant. I just think it's really smart. I hope you figure it out because I want to know the answers.
If I may get a comment in for ourselves here, since Mark gives me an opportunity. We have the Western Hemisphere's quietest magnetic chamber around the corner. So 2 feet of shielding, so you can passively detect what's going on in your brain. And it helps you calibrate new wearable devices that you might be making that can operate in a noisy environment, like a mobile environment out there with all kinds of electromagnetic interference, and be able to pull out the same signal. So it takes infrastructure. Going back to what the chancellor said, if you have the infrastructure, you welcome a whole bunch of new people who come and try out new experiments.
Okay, so there's one more pattern we could bring up. We think of the physicality of the human body, and you mentioned something which just triggered me on this. If you're looking, I was trained in biochemistry. If you're looking at how biochemistry works inside the body, when you're taught in grade school, you see these balls of, here's a molecule, ball. That's really not the deal. When these things interact through a catalyst or whatever is going to go on with a protein and so on, there are fields around. Now, I don't know what a field is, but there are fields around these balls, and that's very, very much the key issue of how they touch each other and interact with each other, change each other, build each other. And if you see the world that way, you could reconstruct your understanding of the human biology and the human body in terms of electric and magnetic fields, and you would probably have a fascinating and really interesting, really important new way of seeing what a human being is. And whether you're trying to repair tissue or whether you're trying to understand health states, these fields extend far beyond the physicality of the ball. Maybe there is no ball. That might be a point that's vanishingly small, but the field is not vanishingly small. And so to get a proper sense of scale of interaction, you would have to flip the channel changer from the physical thing to the field thing, and then you go, wow, that's really interesting picture I'm seeing. And when Larry and I shake hands, 50 or 1,000,000 things are happening all at once between all those fields, and we just think it's like you're touching that person. But no. There's a lot going on there.
I think Mark wants to go back to school.
He does. We've hit another of his top subjects.
Yeah. Barrett.
All right. So let's get back to the patterns at hand. We have a lot. We focus a lot on international agreements and arrangements and tensions. Evan, I'm hoping that you can speak a little bit about what you're seeing as the CEO of Invent IP when it comes to, and someone who is deeply involved in supporting the Ukraine effort. What are you seeing from a global, a global kind of like international
Security
conflict perspective?
Risk, I think for those of you who read SNS, we've talked about this a lot, and it's worked well as an acronym. But we're always watching the informal and increasingly formal alliance between China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, which we've termed CRINC. And I think anybody can see now that used to be controversial, by the way, right? So whatever it was 10 years ago when we first started talking about that, you would get a lot of I don't know if that's really what's going on from folks that are pretty important folks. And now it's pretty much universally accepted, and Ukraine's been a proof case lately. But I was having a conversation yesterday. I was remembering that a Ukrainian friend of mine, was saying, well, the Russians are, already in Crimea at that time, and they're definitely going to be, up to more nonsense, and so we have to get ready. And I was agreeing, and I said, well, the problem for the U.S. is that everybody's also worried about what the Chinese might do in the South China Sea, et cetera, and so you've got this issue in the U.S. in terms of getting support. You've got all this split. And I think we need to stop that because it is the same polity in a way because that alliance is increasingly formalized, because they're now sharing even weapons technology. If you're paying attention, by the way, they're using Chinese drone lasering technology and field testing equipment on the front line. We should have expected that. That's not surprising, to be honest. But to pretend that that's not what's going on is no longer useful to us in the Western world. And I think we need to kind of stop our shenanigans, get our domestic house in order a little bit, and then present a unified front amongst a lot of really fantastic allied nations that have been, for a very long time, strong, great relationships. To abandon those would be really silly at a time like this. But it's also, again, big risk, big opportunity. So the opportunity is most of the world isn't interested in having an authoritarian, tripartite, bizarre security state. And so I think those of us that don't believe that that's a good future for humanity or the planet should be standing up, banding together, remembering who our friends are, and doing something about it. So that's what I try to do.
Thank you for leading into our next session.
Yeah. And we should do some Q&A.
Yeah, we should. We're almost out of time.
Do we have any questions? We have the microphones in the aisles if anyone has a question. And while we do that, I want to talk about one last pattern, which is a demographic pattern that I think is very interesting, which is we are facing this really interesting... So Evan has written a lot about population and how population is... population growth is declining. Population itself is not yet declining, but the growth is declining a lot more quickly than a lot of people expected. And at the same time, we have a population of boomers who are the biggest portion of our human population who are about to be retiring, requiring a lot more medical care. And this is a pattern that is globally almost universally true. There are some countries in Africa where it is not, but across Europe, even across Asia, there are a lot of countries where this is true and where it's going to continue to be a problem and a challenge. It also creates some interesting opportunities. If you think about the housing market, right? So the biggest owners of housing on the planet are going to be retiring more and more. What will that do to the housing market? They're going to be requiring more medical care. How are we at a time when we already have an extreme shortage of doctors? So I'm just going to put that out there because I think it's an interesting one for the week. Amory?
I may have misheard a remark to the effect that the public is accepting and welcoming AI in their lives. The last Pew number I saw the other day is about 17% think it's a good idea, which might fit what you're reporting inside the tech companies. But as a customer, I see Microsoft and Google, among others, cramming down AI in what used to be good products. And this raises the obvious question, why don't we see yet market differentiation where people do AI-free classic variants and see whether they outsell the AI-infected ones? And if that doesn't come from the big tech companies, presumably others can make their own. Do you see that emerging? And if not, why not?
I think you've just identified a major new product sector.
No notes.
I think it's already happening, Avery. And what's happening is when you go to a Microsoft browser homepage, it'll say, "Want AI?" And you go, "No." And it goes, "Want AI?" You go, "No." You know, and then another, you'll pop, "Want to turn on the AI now?" You go, "No." So that's just their second generation of doing the AB thing, because the first one was, here's how you recruit and then you had to type in, like, what is it, no AI. There's some term you type into the URL line to say, I don't want your AI. And then now we're getting the want your, got milk. So I think they're already doing that without us quite understanding what they're doing, but I'm sure they're keeping track. Yeah.
All right, we've got a question over here from Mark.
I'm just going to comment on that.
Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Mark Mahan. And the comment to Amory is that businesses have policies and they want to keep secrets, so they have to have those switches today, and that's why you will see it. Now, for the question, I was wondering if there were some moonshots that you wanted to share with us that you're seeing here at, or perhaps other places.
Ramesh, that feels like a you question. What are your moonshots? Spill your secrets.
Better understanding of what happens inside the brain. Mental health is a big issue, huge costs, clearly influenced by so many things, from diet to our social interactions, to be able to understand it in a much more objective way. Connect brains together, create a super brain.
Brain-to-brain communication.
We actually had a project on that, yeah.
We're done with talking, so that's the moonshot. The moonshot is no more talking. You can read each other's minds. There's a very interesting podcast on that, actually, called the Telepathy Tapes. We are out of time.
We're out of time.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
And so it ended.